homeschooling.
Oh, yeah. Could you take a picture? Yeah. So let's see. I guess my first question, and I'm not sure how many of these were covered
Watch out,
with
she's coming out.
because I wasn't there the whole time. But
How's it going?
Hello.
hey there.
We're just gonna start yoga. So.
We're not filming you, just us.
Oh,
Do
that
you
I
make
don't
noise
care about.
doing yoga?
No, we have music on, so I didn't know.
In there, or
It's better than it wasn't there, I guarantee you that.
Oh, well, no, I was just letting you know, because
Oh,
much
appreciated, thank you.
This is a bigger deal than anything, so
Right.
I'm like, if you hear music, that's why. So, sorry to interrupt,
Alright,
but I didn't want
thank
you to
you.
be irked.
No problem. Thank you very
Thanks.
much.
Appreciate it.
So in the 2012 campaign with Mitt Romney, there have been a lot of attempts to diagnose why the early lead that he was able to build up or the temporary lead gained in the first debate kind of ended up vanishing and President Obama winning the election. What do you think are some of the underlying reasons for why Romney was unable to win in 2012 or how he forgot to run for president, as you said, and how can we rectify that in this election?
he did not come across as somebody who cared about your life and understood your life. And the polling data shows that if you ask for strength and leadership and all these other attributes, he polled very high. But if you ask for does he care about people like you, he polled very low. It was like the one thing that he didn't have. He lacked the ability to say, I want to do this for you, and this is why it'll be good for you, and I care about what you're doing. And I mean, but also when you're that as rich as he was, but he wasn't always that rich. I mean, he came across as having lost the common touch or fellow feeling. The other was his track record was in Massachusetts, and he was governor of Massachusetts with a legislature with enough votes to override him anytime they wanted to. So every one of his accomplishments either happened because crazy Democrats voted with him, or crazy Democrats didn't care enough about what he was doing to stop him. They have to grade on a curve. You say he's governor of Massachusetts, look at what he did, that's pretty good. He tried to run on his record as if it was an impressive set of accomplishments. That's just not true. It's not his fault. He had a crazy, overwhelming, supermajority Democrat legislature from Massachusetts, not from West Virginia, from Massachusetts, always willing to do bad things, never willing to cut him any slack. And he should have said, there are a couple things I was able to do given this ridiculous legislature. I'm coming to D.C. to work with the Republican House and Senate. We're going to change the world. Instead, he kept trying to act like he had a series of serious accomplishments, and worse, he had passed the equivalent of Obamacare. He shouldn't have. It was a huge mistake. The Heritage Foundation told him it was a good idea. Or rather, a person at the Heritage Foundation told him it was a good idea, and he thought he had conservative cover. What he didn't realize was Heritage was the only structure in Washington, D.C. There were 80 conservative groups that denounced the Heritage plan, and he signed on to it. So he also had no connection to the modern conservative movement. Now, you don't have to do everything that that movement wants, but when he referred to himself as severely conservative, it's like 2 Corinthians. You don't know anybody, whoever talks about it, being, a strong conservative. He wasn't part of the tribe. He didn't know anybody in the tribe. He wasn't part of your community. He didn't know anybody. He never talked long enough with anybody in your community to know even what the words are. So I think it'd be impossible to beat Obama when the central issue is supposed to be Obamacare when he in fact did it in his own state, and then he'd come up with some crazy reason why it wasn't exactly the same. It was, for all practical purposes, exactly the same mistake that Obama made. And he should have done it, and maybe once he'd done that, he should have realized he could never run for president successfully because that was too much of a liability to drag that boat anchor with you as you're trying to compete. 2, pick somebody who hadn't done that. If you're picking a relay race team, you don't choose the guy who shot himself in the foot because he's going to bring the team down. All that's in retrospect, and there were other people trying to run for president then who'd have been worse candidates. But I don't know how you get across the finish line somebody who passed Obamacare in Massachusetts and somebody who had next to no meaningful accomplishments. Not none, just next to none. And he can't compete with somebody who had a Republican House and Senate who did all these other things. It's hard to explain who you are if they have to watch you run through waist-deep water. And I can run. Well, that's not what we're seeing. I know, but I'm in waist-deep water. but we're supposed to guess what you'd be like if you were on the beach, right? Better to choose a candidate who could demonstrate what they could do, which is why I was very enthusiastic about Scott Walker. Because he did all the things you'd want a governor to do. He had a Republican legislature, but he still doesn't mean you get everything you want unless you work at it very hard. Romney had many, many handicaps. He was surprising he did as well as he did, but it was a winnable race if we'd done it differently.
Thank you. One of my strongest emergent memories as a young voter was back in 2012 when Ron Paul was asked a really tough question about Social Security and entitlements and benefits, and if they were to be taken all away all at once, how would it impact people? And his response immediately was, well, back before the New Deal and before FDR and the Great Depression, churches provided for people who were hurting, families provided for people who were hurting, and society did it. And after that, after those reforms were passed, then people were dependent upon those institutions, and now we can't wean ourselves off. So I guess as conservatives attempt to make a lot of these big programs, some of which are approaching bankruptcy or some sort of insolvency, as we try to reduce them or make them reformed, and ultimately, hopefully, wean America off of them, how do we try and go about that in a way that might transition them back towards those former institutions that Ron Paul talked about, or something different?
This is where at the same time that you scale back some of the welfare state, you want to make sure you go through and liberalize the rules that handicap the private sector, in charity and in other efforts. And the most important thing you can do to help somebody is to create a job. And that's not something that churches have to do. It's something that the economy will do if you don't whack it on the head with a 2x4. So it really is actually just fulfill the Reagan Republican agenda of less regulation, lower taxes, and get the government to back off. And then you'll be creating jobs that people can take themselves. And the great thing about jobs is nobody ever thinks somebody gave you a job. They know they gave you welfare, they know they gave you food stamps, and they gave you Medicaid. But nobody gives you a job. You make a job real by what you do. Unless it's a make or government job, and really welfare is not a job. So I think it's very important to liberalize the market economy while you shrink the state. If you just shrink the state, but you keep the regulations in so that it's not creating more jobs, then it will problems.
So on the military, when conservatives propose to reduce the size of the federal budget or to reduce the debt, a common retort by liberals is, well, you support a strong military, and the military in our wars have cost so much, and it's been disproportionate. We need to try and limit that, so we need to cut down the military, or else you're a hypocrite. So if someone simultaneously supports a strong military and reducing the size of government, how can those positions be reconciled or simultaneously maintained?
Sure.
Or is it also all right to believe in reducing the military in a marginal way?
No, we need to reduce the cost of the military. The goal is to have a strong economy, not to have an expensive military. There's legislation to reduce the number of civilian Pentagon employees by about 100,000, dramatic reduction in cost. That would bring us back towards the ratio between non-uniform civilian employees in the Pentagon and uniform guys. The tooth-to-tail ratio has gotten out of whack as we've reduced the number of troops because we won the Cold War. We haven't reduced the number of bureaucrats as much, and that needs to happen. That's hundreds of billions of dollars. The whole idea of reforming the retirement system so that we have defined contribution pensions rather than defined benefit, so that young people who come in for a few years have something. I mean, the whole thing is geared up for guys who want to spend 20 years there. That's not most people. That's the brass, that's not the soldiers. And we ought to be structuring it for the soldiers, not just for the officers. Plus, we need to do an audit of the Pentagon. The law says you're supposed to audit all government agencies. They've all been audited except the Pentagon. Pentagon hasn't even started yet. And my brother, who did the budgeting for the Pentagon and then over at Department of Homeland Security, I asked him, I said, why doesn't the Pentagon get an audit? And the answer was, because the first year that they do it, all they'll do is hear all the ugly things they're doing wrong, and they don't want to hear that. And then in future years, and they did that with the Department of Homeland Security, the first audit doesn't tell you everything's fine, it tells you, here's what you got, and here are your problems. Okay. Pentagon goes, we don't want to hear that. Well, at some point, you really have to tell the Pentagon, and I think we should not even consider giving you more money until you agree to an annual audit like everybody else. Again, the audit doesn't mean if they find a problem that you close it down. That they're fighting learning what's wrong. And they give you stupid arguments like, well, you see, they got a lot of helicopters and you can't keep track of where they are. Budget rental car has lots of cars, and they figure out how to keep track of them when they do their audit. Okay? Same thing would work with destroyers and helicopters. That's why you end up with stuff like, we can't find nuclear weapons, we can't find various things. They're not even keeping track of the paper clips. Why do we think they're keeping track of all this stuff? So there's a lot of savings to be made, and we need to focus on the military's goal, which is to have a strong defense so we don't have to fight wars and we don't get messed with, and not use it as a jobs program.
I have one more question. So back in 2012, one of the more memorable aspects of Rick Perry's campaign was his proposal to eliminate several entire government agencies. And of course, he didn't end up articulating that properly, but what was the, if you were in charge, or if it was ideally carried out, are there certain government agencies that you believe are unwarranted in their entirety and should be eliminated?
Sure. I mean, there are whole agencies. We used to have an agency which regulated trucking prices. Nobody should choose trucking prices. We had agencies, the Civilian Aeronautics Board, that regulated the price of flying a plane from one place to another. Nobody should do that. It's not like there's a good way and a bad way to set rates for air traffic. Nobody should set rates for air traffic, just the market. So there's a whole collection of stuff like that that's just ridiculous, where they ought not to do it. And clearly, the more things you look at, I don't know what the FCC does, which regulates airways. They should just assign property rights and go away.
All right, thank you very much.
Yeah.
Good to see you.
It's a pleasure meeting you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mr.
Okay.
Norquist. I really
Good
appreciate
to
it.
see you guys.